Whilst the train staff were sorting out the passengers and finding their correct seat locations and their accommodation, we at the front were making final preparations for the locomotive, considering that were heading for the Blue Mountains, and this was the first time that Flying Scotsman had been up the Blue Mountains. There was some apprehension on my part at least that we would have a good climb. It's the first time that a locomotive of this type had tackled the 133 grade for such a long distance, and one of the prerequisites to doing it reasonably well was to have the fire in good condition, so that although it was 40 miles from here to the start of the climb, we needed to start off with a fire light on the word go.
Dubbo bound!
So what are you guys going on the train?
Yes!
What's the fascination with steam?
Oh, my husband loves steam. Got all little steam trains at home. From Newcastle to Dubbo. What?
That's my colleague Dave Rollins, who came out to Australia with me and was here all of the time that the locomotive was in Sydney. He was in a very fortunate position that day because it was his birthday, and although he was at the front with me during preparation period, he decided that because it was his birthday, he was not going to ride the engine that night. During the last 10 minutes of our time in Central before departure, we were building the fire slowly and getting the back corners filled up, which is important on this locomotive, and building it gently so that it burned through to give us maximum pressure as we started out. problems that was encountered throughout the tour was crew familiarity with the locomotive. The grate was designed for British coal, which burns down to very small cinders and falls through the bars. But Maitland coal, which we were using, burns to cinders which are considerably larger. They wouldn't fall through the gaps in our bars. This created a build-up of ash on top of the bars, which could, over a normal sort of 100 to 120 mile journey, could become a foot thick. Our driver was by this time getting familiar with the driving of the engine because he'd been on it on 2 occasions before. It's interesting to see that he was driving it in the A3 style, that is to say full regulator, and driving it on the reversing wheel. Between Penrith and Valley Heights, there was no Englishman on the footplate, and unfortunately the New South Wales crew lost control of the fire during that period, so that we were having some difficulty by the time we got to Valley Heights. We found in fact at Valley Heights that we'd got a fire that was totally wrong for what was required for the work that was in front of us. The next 20 odd miles of 1 in 33 required a very thin fire, and in fact we'd got an extremely thick one that was heaped up in the middle and very thin on the outside. Our train weight was in the order of 500 tonnes, so we needed a lot of help to get up this hill.
Back up the back and bend down it.
Do you want to get these off there?
At Lawson we had an unexpected delay because the locomotives were to be watered by the fire service. They finished up with having to go away 5 times to get their tank filled to service the locomotives. The result was that what should have been a 45-minute stop at Lawson turned into 1.5 hours.
Flying
The C38 was serviced at this point, and all the motion was re-oiled, which is an interesting comparison between the two locomotives. During the time that we'd been in Australia, we'd done so much running that Flying Scotsman was mechanically in a condition which could be likened to its normal service days. That is to say that it did not need oiling at every stop, which a lot of preserved engines do, and the reason for that is that they run 1 day per month and their oil supplies are never quite run to the extent that they used to be when they were in service. In the case of Flying Scotsman, we'd run so much that our oiling systems were running very, very well. And whilst the 38 crew were oiling all of their motion, all that was done to Flying Scotsman at the same point in the journey was simply a check around to see how warm the bearings were. No oiling was done at all. Yeah, our arrival at Bathurst was somewhere between 7 and 7:30 in the morning, and by which time I'd been on the footplate for 10 or 11 hours. After leaving Bathurst, where we'd changed engine crews, we started the climb of the famous Toomulla Bank. Toomulla Bank is probably the worst climb on the western side of New South Wales, and one which we had heard a great deal about, and although one had seen film and pictures of Tamula Bank, there's nothing like first-hand experience to drive things home. When we left Bathurst, the fire was in a real mess, having suffered further from the damage that had occurred in the early part of the climb of the Blue Mountains. The new crew at Bathurst were obviously very experienced men, and in fact were quite amazing, surprising to me, because one was 64 years of age and one was 63 years of age. The 63-year-old man drove the locomotive and the 64-year-old did the firing. At this stage I would estimate that the fire was a foot thick of ash with 4 inches of fire on the top of that. The whole thing was level with the fire hole door, and to get more coal in it needed to be put into the fire hole door and then pushed in. Our steam raising capacity was down around the 150 pound mark, as in fact can be seen by the strength of the exhaust when compared to that of the 38. I was full of admiration for the Bathurst firemen who worked unstintingly during this climb to try and pull the fire round, and in fact before we reached the top of the climb he had made the engine blow off steam. And it is evident throughout the climb that the Scotsman's exhaust beat is getting stronger, and certainly towards the top can be seen to be doing some real work. Many of the tours that were carried out from Sydney were done with the C38 class of the New South Wales Government Railways, 3801, which is a very famous locomotive in Australia. It had the privilege of being the first of its class, of course, and as such has been preserved and hauled the bicentennial steam train around Australia during 1988. During Flying Scotsman's visit, we worked with it a great deal, but it was always the second engine. There was really only one reason for that, and this was done in the interests of Flying Scotsman, which is a much lighter construction locomotive in terms of its frames. The C38 had cast steel frames which were imported from America, and it weighed 220 tons, and it was felt generally that to have that sort of weight tugging at plate steel frames of the Flying Scotsman was not really technically wise, and so that the Flying Scotsman was always put as the lead engine. In the sidings at Orange east loop, we had our first opportunity to clean the fire. We needed to throw the whole of the fire out and restart it. In fact, this was normal practice to get rid of everything and drop it through our drop grate into the ash pan and then rake the ash pan out and start a new fire just underneath the door. When we did this at Orange, the pit, there was so much ash in the firebox that when raked out, the pit was full up to rail level, which was an enormous amount. Prior to starting cleaning the fire, we had ash and fire right up to the brick arch. Once we left Orange, our steam raising ability had been totally restored and the engine was producing steam and steam to spare. Also, our concern whilst travelling the Sydney suburban area was the state of the tracks was such that we put a speed limit on the locomotive of 80 k's, which is 50 miles an hour, because of the bad point work and a fear of the possibility of a derailment. When we got out west between Orange and Dubbo, the track is mainly a single line with very, very few points or crossings of any description. The result was that we took off the speed limit and during that section ran at speeds up to 70, 75 miles an hour, which was very impressive with two engines pounding along at that speed with a train of some 500 tons behind us. One significant difference between the 38 and the Flying Scotsman when running free was that Flying Scotsman has a snifting valve which allows us to run with the regulator closed. On the 38, they always run with the regulator cracked because they don't have a snifting valve. So at times it appears that the 38 is doing work when Scotsman is not. In actual fact, the only work that the 38 is doing really is to stop a vacuum being created in their cylinders, which is dealt with by the snifting valve in the case of the A3. The visit to Australia by Flying Scotsman was a mixture of a number of things. During the visit to Victoria, we experienced relatively high speed running, whilst in South Australia and West Australia later on in the tour we experienced the haulage of very heavy loads. The time in New South Wales we experienced very steep grades, and in fact it is quite probable that no other Class A3 locomotive has had to tackle the grades that Flying Scotsman's tackled in New South Wales. Grades of 1 in 40 are very common. Some of them are very long and some of them are quite short, but it seems that if the engineers who built New South Wales railways only knew 2 grades, level and 1 in 40. And whilst Flying Scotsman was able to cope with these in spite of its large wheels, it was very, very interesting indeed being with the locomotive whilst these sort of grades were being tackled. Our arrival at Dubbo at approximately 7 p.m. on Saturday, June 10, marked the end of a journey which was extremely nostalgic for a lot of Australians, amazing to us Englishmen in its organisation, the length of the journey, the preparation that had been done, and the type of route that we'd traversed. The recreation of the Western Mail for us, running from Sydney through to Dubbo, running through the night, gave us experiences on the one trip which in normal circumstances would take years to collect.
From Sydney, New South Wales, on the east coast of Australia, the route west travels through the metropolitan area to Penrith, thence over the Blue Mountains and on to the Western Plains cities of Bathurst, Orange and Dubbo. John Whitten was the man who built the Great Western Railway across the Blue Mountains. He was born at Fulby in Yorkshire in 1819. He left London in 1856 to become Engineer-in-Chief of the New South Wales Railways. He was responsible for such masterpieces as the Knapsack Gully Viaduct, 7 sandstone arches, at the centre rising to a height of 126 feet. Approximately 3 miles west of Penrith, the line commences its climb up the Blue Mountains. In a little over 10.5 miles, it rises 964 feet to valley heights, with a ruling grade of 1 in 60. In the steam era, Valley Heights was a small roundhouse with a coal stage. It was built to house the banking engines required for the 1 in 33 climb to Katoomba. The locomotives housed here were mainly 50 class standard goods engines with some 32 classes. Valley Heights finished with the coming of electrification in the mid-1950s. Between Valley Heights and Lawson, the line rises 1,345 feet in 11.57 miles, with numerous tight curbs of 12 to 15 chains and a ruling grade of 1 in 33. The Blue Mountains has always had very interesting railway stations. Here we see Lawson in 1910. Note the buildings in the background, which is still the main street today. From Lawson to Katoomba, with a ruling grade of 1 in 33, the line rises 935 feet in 8.6 miles, with sharp curves predominating. Here we see Katoomba in the 1870s. The little wooden station with coal sidings was once known as Crushers. The Lithgow zigzag started at the top points with its buffer stops, perched on the edge of a 220-foot cliff, and descended 4,200 feet into the Lithgow Valley below. It contained 3 large viaducts with 30-foot arches and 2 tunnels through massive sandstone shoulders. John Whitten, without a doubt, was the greatest railway engineer Australia ever saw. In the 1960s, Lithgow was a major steam depot. It is located 97 miles from Sydney. During the 1960s, Lithgow housed a wide variety of steam locomotives to work all kinds of trains to the west. There were 38 class and a very large amount of 36 class engines, Bayer Garretts and 50 class standard goods locos. The 36 and 38 class locomotives were used on everything from the air-conditioned Central West Express to the local goods trains. West of Lithgow, the line traverses some magnificent country through Sodwalls and Tarranar. During the 60s, all kinds of motive power combinations could be found. "149 miles west of Sydney lies the great railway town of Bathurst. In the 60s, Bathurst was another major steam depot, housing many locomotives. Tamala Bank, approximately 10 miles west of Bathurst, has a ruling grade of 1 in 40 and extremely tight curbs, most being 12 chains. Tamala Bank on a winter's day was a must for the railway enthusiast. All trains were double-headed or banked from the rear. There are some beautiful stations west of Bathurst, such as Newbridge, seen here in the early 1960s, with a 36 heading west on a typical passenger train of that period. "200 miles west of Sydney is the central western town of Orange. Orange was another major steam depot and railway junction for trains going west to Broken Hill and Dubbo. Orange always had a large number of 36 class locomotives. These were often double-headed to Dubbo via Molong or Stewarttown. The locomotive depot was large, with a big coal stage, roundhouse and pits. In the steam days before the closure of many western branch lines, Orange was the place where you could go to faraway places, such as Burke, Cobar, Nyngan, Walgett and many more. Double 36s with a typical western goods train of the 60s was a magnificent sight. Climbing through the hills west of Orange on a winter's day. Dubbo, 287 miles west of Sydney, was the last major depot before the branch lines began. It is interesting to see 3801 here. The year was 1965 and she had run a 2-day western excursion. Dubbo was a big yard with coal stage and a through shed. The main west was certainly a mecca for the steam enthusiast way back in those days. 4472 Flying Scotsman, built at Doncaster in 1923, the first steam locomotive to achieve 100 miles per hour. C38 C38 Class Pacific, built by Clyde Engineering, Granville, Sydney in 1943.